on paltalk.com and on YouTube about the coronavirus and the possibility of a cure, and maybe sooner rather than later, if we're lucky. As of this moment, at the moment that we are going live and recording, there are 65,000 known deaths to the coronavirus, the new coronavirus, worldwide. And we're expecting here in the United States, where I am, that number to really increase dramatically over the next couple of weeks. The curves that they are projecting are going to be quite high here in New York City. They're high already. Just to give you anecdotally an idea of what's happening right now in New York and in New Jersey, there are crematoriums running 24 hours a day. They waived the ordinance that they can't run the crematoriums at night. They're running 24 hours a day. There are makeshift morgues being set up outside of hospitals and funeral homes that can't handle the number of deceased, the number of corpses that they are receiving. I know of an individual who has a company that drives for the funeral homes, taking bodies from the hospitals to the funeral homes, and he's running 12-hour shifts 7 days a week, nonstop, he says. So it's a very, as we all know, serious kind of situation that we're dealing with. But, you know, we have to put things in perspective, and occasionally we have to offer some hope, some optimism, because if we don't offer hope and optimism, we won't be killed by the coronavirus, we'll be killed by our own depression. And even if we're not physically dead as a result of the depression, you know, our souls will suffer as a result of the depression. And I think it's my responsibility as a seeker of information to bring us some positive or potentially positive angles to this story as I get them. And I know that if I'm sick of hearing the doom and gloom all the time, I know that my audience surely is sick of hearing the doom and gloom all the time. And I like to be a likable guy. I want you guys to want to come and hear what I have to say. So I was very, very lucky to bring to you today Isaiah Arkin. He's known as Shy Arkin. He is a professor at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And you may have heard that in Israel, there are a number of research teams trying to find a vaccine and trying to find a cure. And one of those teams is headed by Shy Arkin. And Shy, I want to welcome you to Facebook, paltalk.com, and YouTube today.
It's a pleasure to be here. After your gloomy start, I think, you know, things can only get better after that. So
yeah, so it was pretty doom and gloom. Nobody wants to see me coming around when I'm a reporter on the street, because I'm not going to cover happy things. They say, oh God, here he comes again, unfortunately, because that's how the news business, unfortunately.
Well, these are difficult times.
These are very, very difficult times, and we don't want to minimize it. And we want, and it's very important. I think broadcasters, more so than even newspaper reporters, we have a responsibility to, and the newspaper reporters as well, but we have a responsibility to quickly get the correct information out to the public, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. And we don't want, you don't want, I don't think any of us want people to act upon information that actually could be injurious to their health, which we sometimes hear. So I'm so glad to have you. I want to get right to it. You have a team of researchers working under you, and as I understand it, it's 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, is how it's been explained to me, trying to find a cure, not a vaccine, a cure to this COVID-19. And you seem pretty optimistic that there's a good chance that you might be successful in the near future. Well,
so first of all, let me set things straight. So there's
Okay.
two general routes in order to combat any viral disease. There's vaccination and there's drug therapy. For some viruses, we have one. For other viruses, we have the other. And there's even some viruses where we have both approaches. For example, for HIV, we only have drugs. For smallpox, we have vaccination. And for influenza, we have both. We have Tamiflu and we have the yearly shots. So what we are trying to do is, based on the knowledge that we've accumulated through the years, to try to combat SARS coronavirus 2 based on our knowledge that we've accumulated on SARS coronavirus 1. So essentially what we have is a head start. And the reason for that is because I'm one of those curious individuals that was actually working on coronaviruses prior to December of 2019. Because I was fascinated by them from what took place in 2003, the first SARS epidemic. And we've been trying to elucidate the mechanisms of how this virus works and its particular components. And now it would seem that all that esoteric knowledge has become, the focal point of the medical environment. So we are very excited to be able to contribute everything that we have learned over the years. And as you said, we are working day in and day out in order to try to see if we can come up with drugs that inhibit this virus.
What specifically are you doing? And in layman's terms, as I understand it, and I know you will correct me if I'm wrong, you're throwing all kinds of chemicals at the virus to see how it responds. Is that pretty much what's happening?
Right. So first of all, we need to remember that if we want to inhibit a virus, we don't need to inhibit every single component of the virus. I always like to give the analogy of an automobile. If you want to ensure that a car does not run, you can insert a malfunction in the steering system, in the transmission, in the engine. You can deplete all the gasoline. You can puncture the tires. There's lots of different things you can do in order to ensure that a complicated machine stops working. So we have identified, again, based on our knowledge of close to 2 decades working on SARS-1, we've identified a particular component that is very druggable. And druggable is the term that people use for something that you can identify a drug that inhibits. So yes, what we are doing is we are challenging this particular component of the virus with different chemicals and trying to see if any one of these inhibits. Now, we're not just throwing every garden variety chemical out there. We are doing what we believe to be the fastest possible process, and that is drug repurposing. Now, what do I mean by that? There are several thousands of drugs out there that have already been approved for use for human health. Now, not against COVID-19, but for lots of other different diseases, be it liver, high blood pressure, baldness, whatever, you name it. But the important thing is that the toxicity of those drugs has already been established. So if you find by chance that one of those drugs is able to inhibit COVID-19, the virus that causes COVID-19, then you're very fortunate, because then the route to enable you to use that drug is incredibly rapid, because all of the toxicity has already been taken care of.
And of course, that would be an optimal, Shy Arkin at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, way of going at it, because then you don't have to develop a new drug. You would have a drug that's already been approved by, here in the United States, the FDA, for other purposes, and probably in other countries as well by their regulatory agencies. And so you could get right to it and just step up the manufacture of that particular pharmaceutical, and boom, we've got a treatment.
Right. So that, in my mind, would be the best way to proceed for the short term. Slightly longer or medium term, obviously, the development of vaccine, but it's very difficult to see any dramatic achievements gotten within the next few months. It's probably going to take anywhere up to a year and maybe slightly beyond that. And longer term would be the development of brand new drugs, brand new chemical entities that inhibit. So I think what the scientific community is trying to do is to do A, B, and C all at the same time. Let's try the fastest route with repurposing drugs, using them off-label, if you will. At the same time, The medium term, let's try to develop vaccines, and let's try to look for new chemicals. So we're doing all of that simultaneously in order to be able to provide a robust answer against this pandemic.
Now, we know that there are some other medications that are already being tried in some areas with mixed results. What's different about what you are doing in your research at Hebrew University in Jerusalem as compared to what the doctors are now already trying, at least on some of their patients?
We have identified, again, a particular component of the virus that is, as I said, is very druggable, is easy to drug. It belongs to a family of proteins that on the whole have been very successful as drug targets. So we are focusing on that particular component. You're absolutely right to state that people have been using hydroxychloroquine and other drugs in order to combat the virus. This is a classical example of drug repurposing. But I don't want those mixed results to hamper our enthusiasm, because there have been tremendous results and achievements with drug repurposing. For example, there might be more people today taking aspirin, not to reduce headaches, but rather to lower high blood pressure, etc. So there are a large number of drugs that were originally designed for one particular purpose, and yet today we use them for something completely different. If it were up to me, if there were no pressure due to time, and of course there is, what we would do is we would try to, search for as many chemicals as possible. But then the moment that you find something, you need to go through all the regulatory procedures, which are necessary, obviously, because the last thing that you want to do is to provide a drug that causes harm rather than benefit. So what we're doing right now is we're doing the obvious steps in order to search for the fastest possible cure.
Shy, tell me why you are cautiously optimistic. I think that may be a fair assessment of where you are.
Right.
You're going to be successful relatively soon. And I don't know what relatively soon actually means, but at least with step one in all of this, as you outlined it.
Well, what we've done so far is we've screened several hundred chemicals, and we've found one or two that I wouldn't say are good. They're far from being a medication, but they do demonstrate that if you were to search a larger library, you would have a significant probability of getting something. And that's what we're doing. And I would say it's not only us. I would imagine lots of labs around the world are trying to do exactly that, each of them using different targets with different assays, etc. So this sort of most rapid route is known to all. And I think that's why everyone's using it.
Mm. And since you've been studying the coronavirus family for so long, can you kind of explain why this one is so lethal as compared to some of the others?
So I'm going to say something that might sound a bit sort of sheepish, but the short answer is no. We really don't know why this variant, this coronavirus, is significantly more deadly than its very close cousins that are responsible for something like a third or perhaps less of the common cold. We don't necessarily know why. Sometimes they elicit a very strong immune response, and it's that immune response that causes us problems. But again, we don't necessarily know.
Well, I do know that from the physicians and physicians' assistants and nurses on the front lines, and God bless all of them, especially since they don't have enough PPEs to go around, personal protection equipment to protect them, that they're learning something new almost every day about this virus, and who's susceptible and who isn't more likely to become, a fatal statistic. And so there's a lot to learn because, as you pointed out earlier, Shy Arkin, this came up on us very, very quickly.
Right. I mean, I realize that it's a bit disparaging to look at the overall numbers today and to try to think, why don't we have an answer? But in all honesty, we should realize that we were only confronted with this for about 3 months now. So the ability to come up with a very good solution with such a short period of time, I think is incredibly, well, I wouldn't even say overly optimistic. Having said that, now I'll try to provide an optimistic view. I think that I would be very surprised if the scientific community does not come up with a very strong solution within a year's end. So that would seem to be unrealistic. But I do think that it is fair to say that if you look at susceptibility, this is not that dissimilar from the flu. This, while there are cases of people that are not classified as the elderly having succumbed to this, the vast majority of fatalities are in, the older you get, the more susceptible you are. So in that case, it's not that dissimilar from other respiratory diseases.
And of course, that is going to cause, and probably is in some areas, including here in New York City, all kinds of moral questions they have to be made when they're triaging who gets treated and who doesn't. When you have a very finite number of beds and ICU beds and ventilators in the various hospitals, that's just a sad reality of how they have to triage. And unfortunately, I happen to be in that category. And if God forbid my son had it and I had it, and we went in at the same time, the chances of him getting a bed are much better than me. That's just the way it works.
Right. But once again, let's try to shed some optimistic light on this. So if we look around the world, I think it's safe to say that even countries that were hit very hardly by this, if it's Spain or if it's Italy, etc., the number of new cases that they've had are diminishing. So social distancing works. Social distancing works.
Let's repeat that. Social distancing
works. I advocate everyone to have a look. There's a fantastic website by Johns Hopkins University.
It is terrific.
It gives you, and all you need to do is to scroll to the bottom right and look at the daily increases, and you can actually see that in many countries, the daily increases are getting smaller. Now, the problem is that people are somewhat impatient, because the results that we see today are due to activity that took place 2-3 weeks ago. The deaths that you see today are due to measures that were enacted 2 to 3 weeks ago. So I realize that people see when social distancing restrictions are increased, people don't necessarily see the benefits tomorrow. They'll see them within 2, 3, 4 weeks. So the problem is that, patience is required. But again, the lessons that were learned from places like Italy and Spain and France are completely clear. Social distancing and testing works.
I don't know if this is something that you feel qualified in answering from your perspective as a researcher, but somebody in the Facebook community, Cindy Elbridge Hale, is asking, is the virus cut with other virus like AIDS, as we've heard? I don't know where that came from. I've never heard that one before.
I'm not necessarily certain what the term virus cut with other viruses like AIDS, but it's a very, very, very different kind of virus. I think people don't necessarily appreciate the fact that viruses are more dissimilar from one another than we are, for example, from bacteria. They're amazingly different from one another. So the ability to come up with a overarching antibiotic, a drug that will both inhibit influenza, will inhibit hepatitis, and will inhibit HIV is unrealistic in that respect.
I'm going to throw another question at you before I let you go, because it's one of your country women calling out Israel. Gaia is asking, what percentage of the fatalities are smokers without background conditions? Do you feel comfortable handling that one?
Actually, I don't know what the number is, but I would overall say that, smoking is probably not beneficial and is detrimental to probably every vital statistic that one has. So here's another clear recommendation from a university professor: stop smoking.
Okay, we're going to take that. And here's what my recommendation to you is: that you get back to work right now. And I kind of feel almost guilty taking you away from your research, but I want to schedule you for when you come up with some kind of a medicine that mitigates or maybe even cures the problem. we'll have you back on again.
It's a pleasure. I think it's important for the public to be knowledgeable about this. And as I said several times, this is not the end of humanity. Yes, we are fearful because the outcome is unknown, but I'm certain that this is not going to develop like, this is not the Black Plague of the 21st century. Far, far from it.
Well, because we have science today that we didn't have then, and we're counting on science, whether it's you or somebody else, to resolve this for us. Thank you, Shy. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right. Be well. So we're hoping for the best, that Shy is very successful, obviously, in his research. I've got some news briefs to tell you. Tom Dempsey, this just came over. Tom Dempsey, the legendary New Orleans Saints place kicker, just came over, 79 years of age, died from the coronavirus. And this one just really pisses me off, ladies and gentlemen. In Rumson, New Jersey, last night, a group of 30 adults, not teenagers, adults, had a big lawn party. It was a Pink Floyd party. Now, whether you like Pink Floyd or not, the fact is you shouldn't be gathering in groups. And the areas where we are seeing this spike are areas where people are gathering in groups. There's a woman who's a radio reporter here, Alan Stockton Rossini, who went out and covered when the coronavirus first hit New York State. And then on March 3rd, threw a surprise birthday party for her grandmother, who was in her 90s. And the people who attended that party were in their 90s as well. And a bunch of them got infected, and several of them died. She feels horrible about it, and that's why she went public. She was asymptomatic at the time. I agree with Janice Wolf's statement here in the Facebook gathering. Ignorance is blissfully lethal. Tomorrow, Monday, April 6th, at 5 o'clock New York time, we're going to be back with an emergency room doctor who believes there is a medication right now. It's not a panacea, but it can save tens of thousands of lives. But the emergency rooms in the United States aren't stocked with them. And he's going to tell us what the medication is, where in the world it's being used, what the success rate is there, and why hospitals in the United States of America will not stock this medication that is manufactured right here in the United States. That's at 5 p.m. New York time, Monday, on Facebook and Pal Talk and YouTube. And until then, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. I hope you were informed. Please feel free, if you think that this information was valuable, to share it. Please follow me on Facebook and on YouTube. If you follow me on Facebook, you'll get notified the next time I am going live. Even if you are my friend on Facebook, follow me. And to the paltalk.com audience in the Pal Talk Global Newsroom, and for those who want to join me there, I'm on the way over there right now. Until the next time we meet, as I always say at the end, peace out. And I'll say also, please stay safe.